I've had what you would call an on and off relationship with Battlefield. My first real introduction to the franchise was the Bad Company series, which I loved, but when Battlefield 3 rolled around, I never got too deep into it. Then Battlefield 4 dropped, and, setting aside all the technical issues that mired its release, it was never really my thing. The maps were huge and barren, the vehicles were powerful and plentiful, and the amount of customization was as daunting as it was impressive. I understand the appeal, but it's just not for me. Then Hardline came out and reinvigorated, I'm just kidding. Then Battlefield 1 came out in 2016 and brought me back into the fold. I was excited for it from day one just because of its historical setting, which was notably missing from the AAA FPS landscape back then, and when I finally got my hands on the game, I loved it. It certainly had its shortcomings, mainly a lack of weapons at launch, but its streamlined design was exactly what I needed to get back into the franchise. This was the game that made Battlefield more than just something I play for a month or two after launch. Prior to its announcement, there were false rumors floating around that Battlefield 2018 would be Bad Company 3 set in Vietnam, and still to this day I have dreams of an alternate reality where it's still Battlefield 5, but the V means both 5 and Vietnam, and it has clever cover art that's a hand doing a peace sign. Anyway, that's obviously not what we ended up with. Instead, we're stuck in the boring, predictable timeline where a World War II game comes right after a World War I game, at least supposedly. Whether it's due to its obvious roots in BF1 or its lack of Americans, Russians, Japanese, and actual Nazis, my brain does not recognize this as being a World War II game. It seems like a fictional conflict that never really happened. Maybe they really did want to make a purely European World War II game devoid of iconic or recognizable locations, but the cynic in me sees the similarities between many of the assets of this game and BF1 and assumes the worst. I could easily look past that if the game itself held up, but rather than being a logical evolution of BF1, BF5 makes some strange sidesteps by introducing a lot of change for the sake of change, while simultaneously failing to deliver something that feels genuinely new. I haven't played more than an hour of any Battlefield campaign since Bad Company 2, but since I wanted to do a full review of this game, it would have been disingenuous of me to not at least give the war stories a try. After playing all three of them to completion, I can safely say that they're not worth playing, and DICE probably knows that too. As far as I can tell, they exist solely for EA to put a bullet point on the back of the box that says single-player mode included. I didn't have a stopwatch out, but in total, they were definitely less than 3 hours, and even at that length, they overstayed their welcome. The first is about a failed bank robber who's approached by a British army officer and offered a deal to get out of jail. The second is about a Norwegian mother and daughter who stopped the Germans from creating an atom bomb, and the third is about a platoon of North Africans proving their worth in France. Tonally, they're all over the place. The British one was the most fleshed out and coincidentally the most cringe-worthy too.
Oh, I fucked up. Yeah, you fucked up. You're useless.
Fucking know that, don't I? I did roll inspection on myself, alright?
Yeah, well, no surprise there.
I did it with me dad. He said I was useless just like you, and then he fucked off and let me take the fall for it.
No, listen to me, you're not... You're not useless. Why do you think that I recruited you for in the first fucking place?
No idea.
Because you're a trier. Like them banks you tried to rob. Even though you fucked up, you kept trying.
The Norwegian one was a disjointed mess with an abrupt ending, and the French one kept laying on the horrors of war only to have a happy ending. What they all have in common is skeletal, excruciatingly boring level design with some half-assed cutscenes, or sometimes nothing at all, patching their unrelated gameplay segments together. Half is Far Cry 3-like stealth, which goes over as well as you would expect in a franchise known for chaotic 64-player action, and the other half is a mix of shooting gallery and tower defense. Based on their length and quality, I doubt the time and effort spent on making them was to the detriment of multiplayer's development, but if it's going to be like this, just stop making single player and deal with the consequences like Activision and Treyarch did. DICE felt the need to make a litany of changes to the minute-to-minute gameplay in multiplayer, so instead of boring you with all the minor details, I'll just stick to the ones that I felt to be the most impactful. Squad reinforcements are, in a sense, this game's version of behemoths, in that their intention is to change the flow of the match. During a game, each squad's points are put into one pool that the squad leader can then spend on one-time items like vehicles or supply drops. Not a bad system in theory, at least it's performance-based, but the problem is that the only worthwhile reinforcement is the big 41,000 point bomb. What this means is that everyone waits for the bomb and gets it at about the same time, resulting in a deluge of bombs in the last quarter of evenly matched Conquest games. Calling one in is exciting, but in terms of design, it's clearly not a well thought out system.
Just spawn me.
Let's see the damage. Oh my god! Oh my god!
How many, dude?
How many was that? Revives are now completely different. Squad mates can now revive each other with a lengthy animation, and medics can revive anyone with a much shorter animation. In my experience, this change has greatly diminished the role of the medic class, and that feeling is only further amplified by the health crates that come by way of the fortifications system. DICE, as well as myself, although for completely different reasons, put a lot of emphasis on fortifications, but ironically, many players seem to be completely oblivious to them. In place of gas masks, all players now have a hammer that lets them build fortifications on the objectives, including health and ammo crates. Most points don't have the crates pre-built, and there's no indication that they can be built unless you're in fortification mode, a serious oversight considering how vital the mechanic is. Outside of the crates, though, I'm still not entirely sure what to think of fortifications. Pushing T reveals an entire world of sandbags and barbed wire, but it's a world that, unless you're playing support, takes a century to realize and only a second to destroy. At worst, they're a hindrance that prevents you from getting into your own point, such as E on Rotterdam, and at best, they provide a few bullets worth of cover. Combat sees some major tweaks as well. Time to kill is extremely low, and because of it, long-distance tap firing is now the name of the game. What this has translated to, for me at least, is playing as Assault 80% of the time. In BF1, I would often switch classes, but in this game, that just doesn't make sense. Because revives and supplies are less of a concern, it's now more about who has the best guns, and that is undoubtedly the Assault class. I've come to the determination that the M1907SF is the most powerful gun in the game. In BF1, a gun that feels like this would normally be an exclusively close-range weapon, but in BF5, it not only shreds at close and medium range, but can also compete at a distance when tap-fired. The STG-44, what I thought to be the best weapon in the beta, is still good, but I don't see a reason to use a longer range weapon like that when the close-range ones are only slightly less effective at a distance. At least within the Assault class, most of the guns don't have well-defined roles anymore. Everything sort of bleeds into each other. It's fun to be the guy running around with rockets, a grenade rifle, and an SMG that does double duty as a sniper, racking up 40+ kills in Conquest, but it throws any sense of weapon types or roles out the window. I did give all the other classes a shot though. Support is okay, and sniping, while not as satisfying as BF1, can have its moments. Medic, however, is easily the worst pick of the bunch now. As if the democratization of revives and health packs wasn't enough, they were also given horrible, flaccid, pea-shooter-esque guns. I've used 4 of them so far, and they're a complete joke compared to what everyone else has. To complement all the guns, they added a perk system called Specializations that replaces the weapon variants we had last time. It's kind of strange, since they have no visual impact on the weapon, but it's a cleaner way of doing things than having 5 versions of the same gun. These upgrades affect the guns dramatically, to the point where a base gun is useless in comparison. Apart from potentially throwing weapon balance out of whack, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with this system. Everyone has access to it, it can't be bought with real money, and it doesn't take long to fully spec out a gun. The only issue is how poorly the game informs the player of this, or to be more precise, how it doesn't. Everyone I've played with had no idea the system existed until I told them about it, and to make matters worse, specializations, as well as assignments, are not accessible in-game, while gun skins are. Why? The last core gameplay mechanic worth discussing is the new spotting system. Enemies hit by sniper fire are temporarily revealed, but the age of mashing Q and shooting at moving markers is gone. This time around, pressing Q puts down a static marker to alert your teammates to danger. This might be the only big change in the entire game that I feel works well and as intended. Now that time to kill is so low, the spotting spam of old would be pretty obnoxious, and as an added bonus, it's now possible to be stealthy too. In terms of content, there are 6 game modes at launch, with Firestorm, the Battle Royale mode, absent since we apparently have too much to do at the moment. Of course there's Conquest, more on that later, and classic modes like Domination and Team Deathmatch. Returning from BF1 is the Grand Operations mode, which strings together multiple game modes and has 2 32-player teams battle it out over the course of multiple matches. I wasn't a fan of it in BF1, and this game doesn't change that, but it seemed to be a generally competent mode. Finally, there's Breakthrough and Frontlines. Breakthrough is a 64-player Rush-esque mode that has the attackers push the defenders back 2 points at a time. The matches are pure chaos, since it's squeezing 64 players into a playspace that's only a fraction the size of the normal maps. The balance is completely out of whack at the moment, but I do enjoy the carnage a lot, and it's probably the only non-conquest mode that I'll come back to regularly in the future. Frontlines is similar to Breakthrough, but it's only 32 players, and the teams can push each other back and forth on the map. I don't see any reason for it to exist when Breakthrough does almost the same thing in a more exciting way. Overall, the modes could be better, but Conquest is what makes Battlefield Battlefield, and consequently, that's what most people, including myself, will spend the bulk of their time playing. Despite all the changes made to gameplay, or maybe because of them, DICE have made almost no changes to Conquest, so it really comes down more to maps. The 8 maps included at launch are, on average, fine. Infantry-focused maps like Fell, 652, and Devastation are easily my favorite in the game, and they can be a ton of fun, but then there's ones like Aerodrome and Hamda, big flatlands with 1 or 2 persistent choke points that I absolutely despise. This is par for course with Battlefield though, as it's a franchise that features both infantry and vehicle combat. At this point, I just accept that there's going to be some vehicle-focused maps that I don't like. However, I am disappointed to say that there aren't any 10 out of 10 bangers here like Argonne Forest or Fort de Vaux. In my eyes, Battlefield 5 is an altered form of Battlefield 1 that tries to appeal to the more hardcore Battlefield fan. You've got weapons that can be tap-fired from extreme distances, a low time to kill, some maps that harken back to BF4, and design that attempts to keep people on objectives and with their squads. Does it successfully achieve this goal, and more importantly, is it a good game? For the most part, not really. The systems in this game are half-baked to the point where it feels unfinished and lacking in identity. That being said, I've still managed to have a decent amount of fun playing it in spite of its glaring flaws. I can oppose the design all I want, but at the end of the day, it's still a new Battlefield game, and they haven't done anything so horrendous that it completely destroys the Battlefield experience. If you like Battlefield, there is some enjoyment to be had here, there's no denying that. At the same time, BF5 does not come even close to representing the best this series has to offer, and at launch, it cannot justify its $60 asking price. Battlefield 5 will undoubtedly evolve over the course of the next 2 years, but the lack of a premium pass scares me. With it, we know exactly what we're getting, and they have an obligation to put that content out. Yes, they have a roadmap, but we have no idea how much content they plan on giving us by the end of this game's life cycle. If the player base quickly shrinks after the first 3 months, they could silently scale back the DLC content and we would be none the wiser. Based on Battlefront 2, we know that they'll at least keep their promise and continue to support the game, but I can almost guarantee that it'll end up being less content than BF1's Premium Pass. Considering that we're already seeing 50% off sales, the future of this game is in limbo, but if it gets significantly less support than BF1, it'll almost certainly die a swift death. All things considered, I'm rather indifferent towards Battlefield 5, so I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. Taking into account its design flaws, content deficit, and occasional technical hiccups, 5 out of 10 is rather generous, but I can't pretend that I'm not getting some enjoyment out of it. Tearing it up in Conquest is fun, but I could be tearing it up in any number of other games. There's not much of anything unique on offer here, and the score reflects that. I think it's really unfortunate that this game is what we ended up with. If they wanted to do something different with World War II, they could have set the game in the Pacific, but then they wouldn't have been able to recycle so much of BF1. Above all else, Battlefield 5 makes me wonder what DICE have been up to for the past 2 years. If you played the game yourself, feel free to let me know what you thought down below. I plan to start streaming on Twitch soon, so I'd appreciate a follow over there if you're interested. A link is in the description, along with my Discord server and Twitter. Until next time, thanks for watching.